I'm going to throw out the first question to our panelists for them to consider. And that is, how should we judge the impact that Russian interference has had on the U.S. presidential election of 2016? What were Moscow's motivations? How unique was this effort? And how should we assess the success of its efforts? And give the floor first to Masha Gessen, who wrote, I think, a very incisive and critical commentary in New York Review of Books on the CIA dossier. Perhaps you can take the first stab at that.
Thank you. So the answer is actually very simple. We have no idea. You know, and I think that that's something that's very difficult to grapple with. But the piece I wrote for the New York Review on the joint intelligence report, the unclassified joint intelligence report, basically said that there's nothing in the report. Now, a very charitable reading of that report would be that because it's unclassified, there's nothing in it. But it's very difficult to try to figure out what meat could possibly be put on those bones. Because the arc of the argument is essentially that that Russian security contractors hacked, or representatives hacked, the Democratic National Committee. And this, the agencies have established with high confidence, and this I don't see any reason to doubt, right? But then the arc of the argument is that, and then they use that information to influence American public opinion. And this is where I think it gets very, very tricky, because there's, you know, influencing American public opinion through open means, especially if those means are the propaganda channel RT, doesn't seem to amount to much, right? And the very idea that that, you know, public opinion needs to be kept somehow untainted, unsullied, these are words that have been used in the coverage, you know, pure, nationally pure, seem really suspect to me. So there's nothing in the report that indicates that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian effort. If there were, you know, then I think we'd have something to talk about. But there's nothing in the arc of that argument that indicates that. So I think I'll actually stop there.
Great. Will, how do things look from your desk and your perch?
Well, I hate to say this, but I do agree with Masha for the most part. But when we look at what was released of the emails of the DNC and of John Podesta, you know, there wasn't anything very shocking in them. There was this steady drumbeat which reminded people, oh yeah, Hillary Clinton email, privilege, and then that, I think, may have gotten mixed up in people's minds with the server that she had. So it may have helped to feed that scandal a little bit. She did get nearly 3 million more votes than Trump did. So how can you say what motivated the 70,000 people in the 3 states that made the difference? I think that is very difficult. I think simply intervening, if I can put it that way, maybe that is too strong a word. Simply taking these steps, if we grant that we're pretty sure that Russia did this on government orders, that in itself helps to sort of shake things up a little bit, perhaps cast doubt on, you know, the legitimacy of the election, the sanctity of the election, and perhaps that was really the intention.
Great. Paul, same question to you. I'd be especially interested in your perspective, given your time in Moscow, as to what the Kremlin's motivations might be and what their reactions might be to how this whole spectacle is unfolding here.
I'll just make one quick point. One thing to watch is the CIA report, the unclassified CIA report that came out, wasn't looking at the question of whether there was collusion between the campaign and the election. But last week, the Senate Intelligence Committee announced that they would be looking at that issue. So they are about to embark on a probe of both the hacking as well as any possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia. And initially, Senator Burr, who's the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had said that he wasn't interested in looking at any possible collusion, and the Democrats on the committee kind of battered him into agreeing that the scope of the probe would include that. So in terms of whether or not there was any collusion, it would be probably we'd want to be looking to the results of that inquiry, which is just getting started. I think in terms of the validity of the report, I think I'm in the same boat as everyone else. The reality is we don't know. We haven't seen the classified version of the report, and we don't know whether the reason that the unclassified version seems thin is because they're being especially protective about sources and methods, and they don't want to give away what kind of wiretaps they have on Moscow, what kind of human spies they have in Moscow, and if they are getting some of their information from that, then the idea is that they would have left that out of the report in order to protect their sources and methods. The flip side of the argument is that they don't have the goods. And that their assessment, and that it is an assessment, it is not a truth, that Russia was behind this. We can't evaluate the steps by which they got to that assessment because we don't have the information that they used, and we probably won't have it. So then we're in this tricky position of being asked to simply believe in the conclusion of these great American institutions at a time when we are probably in one of the biggest crises of faith in institutions in America. And so we're being told, this is what happened, make your policy and your decisions and take action against Russia on this basis. But we can't really, give you the information about why we believe that. And I think that's a really hard policymaking position to be in, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, because you're potentially, taking acts, hostile acts such as sanctions and other possible actions on the basis of an assessment without having the public fully on board. Only 51, we just did a poll, 51% of Americans believe that Russia was behind this. So it's hard to steer policy when only half of your electorate is on board with the basic truth on which you're trying to base your policy.
Kim, perhaps you also bring in an academic and analytical perspective on some of these questions.
Sure. As this discussion has been going on, I've thought of 3 points. The first is that the first attribution of Russia as being the one who did the hacking did not come from a U.S. government agency. It came from a private corporation, CrowdStrike, and they have online their assessment. They have a very deep report of why they came to that conclusion, and it's based on all kinds of pattern analysis, and they have explained why it would have been very difficult for an imposter to try to do all of those different elements of the pattern analysis, and therefore why they believe that especially Fancy Bear is the one that they concentrate on. Fancy Bear is the Russian military intelligence agency, the GRU, and they go into depth. And so we do have information about why the attribution was made that's coming from that private source. And a very important point to take out of that is that when we are thinking about cyber defense these days and potentially about cyber offense also, it's going to be a collaboration between private actors and the federal government that's involved. It's not going to be the government acting alone, which puts us in a very different situation for international security than we've been in before. Second point that I was thinking of as this conversation was going on is that we have to remember who Vladimir Putin is. Vladimir Putin is a career KGB officer. And we see an awful lot of the people that are closest to him in his government at the top level as also being career KGB officers. And so for that reason, when we're thinking about this, it makes sense to go back in history and trying to put this into the context of how the KGB has acted before. And I would just bring up a point that I haven't heard in the news, but that I think is very important. The KGB always tried to have all kinds of political influence. They waged influence campaigns, not only in the United States during the Soviet period, but also among allies of the United States and also among members of the Warsaw Pact, who were their own Soviet allies. When it came to their actions in the United States and in the West, they were singularly unsuccessful. They never had a very good understanding of how American politics actually worked. And I would ask us all to think about this. If you were Putin, you might want to cause disruption in the U.S. campaign and in U.S. politics. would you want all of this attention, this very negative attention, put on Russia at a time when Western European governments are facing the same situation? And so now they have the American example in mind. That means that they're going to be especially attuned to Russian influence campaigns inside their own countries. And I think that maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. That, you know, we tend to come at this with the idea that Putin is so successful and such a master at this. Maybe he actually blew it because the intervention was so ham-handed that it was easy for CrowdStrike to figure out what was going on. And he never intended to have this made as public as it was. And the final thing that I would say is that when we're looking at hacking, keep in mind also that very vast Russian effort, starting in Soviet times, when the internet was first coming into being, and even before it was officially the internet, hacking coming from Russia towards the United States is a constant. And so what's new about this is the special combination and the fact that it's gotten so much publicity. There is nothing new about massive Russian hacking of U.S. sources.
I would say that there is one thing that's new. I think the disclosure's new. So I think, you know, it's kind of accepted by the U.S. and Russia that we're kind of going to hack one another and for espionage purposes, so we know what the other person is up to. But then releasing that information to for public effect is something that is somewhat new. Yeah.
Okay. Masha, did you want to do that?
I'm not questioning whether Russian actors and Russian state actors were behind the hacking. I mean, that seems to be the one thing that is fairly solidly established. What I'm questioning is the logic that means that Russia influenced the election, right? Because then you have to question, well, by what means did Russia influence the election? How were the products of those hacks used? For the most part, the media that picked up the products of those hacks are mainstream American media, and the New York Times coverage I thought was very odd, very very critical of Clinton, and I'm surprised that we're at a point where legacy media pick up products of illegal actions without debate, right? I mean, this was, they ran with the WikiLeaks publications the day after they appeared. The argument that's being made by the joint the report of the intelligence agencies is that it was RT that played a key role, right? Because it would actually be quite difficult to argue that Russia influenced the American election by using the New York Times. And that's the problem that I have with that whole argument.